I'm Laura, 65 years old, and I never thought my own son would humiliate me in a public place. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I had arranged to meet Richard at one of the city's most elegant restaurants, a place with soft lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and the faint melody of a piano playing in the background. I wanted Michael and Jennifer to finally meet Richard in a setting that felt special, hoping perhaps a beautiful environment would soften Michael's cynicism. "Mom, seriously, you're dating again at your age?" Michael laughed as soon as he saw us, his voice sharp, carrying over the quiet hum of other diners. I felt a wave of heat rise to my face, embarrassment tightening around my chest. Richard, always the gentleman, extended his hand politely. "Nice to meet you, son. Your mother talks about you all the time." "I'm not your son," Michael snapped, dismissing the handshake, his tone harsh, leaving Richard standing there with a calm but guarded expression. I felt my heart break as Jennifer smirked, leaning toward Michael to whisper something that fez him laugh cruelly. The world seemed to narrow around me, the soft jazz in the background fading into nothing as shame and hurt clutched at my chest. "Richard is a wonderful man, Michael. I expect you to treat him with respect," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound composed. "Wonderful. Mom, look at him. What does he even do?" "Probably after your money from Dad's inheritance," Michael sneered, his words slicing through me more sharply than any physical pain. Richard's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm, his eyes reflecting patience and unspoken disappointment. "I should go, Laura," he murmured, his voice low but firm. "No, please stay," I begged, tears threatening to fall, my hands clasped tightly over the menu, gripping it like a lifeline. Michael's face contorted with anger, and in one sudden motion, he grabbed the nearest glass of red wine from the table and flung it over Richard's head. The deep red liquid splashed across Richard's tuxedo and hair, dripping onto the crisp white tablecloth. Gasps echoed through the restaurant, forks paused mid-air, and a waiter hurried forward with towels. Richard froze for a moment, stunned, before taking a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. "Laura," he whispered, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. I felt a combination of horror and shame, my chest tightening so painfully it was hard to breathe. Michael grabbed Jennifer's arm and stormed toward the exit, not a word of apology on his lips. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath in the silence he left behind, the faint piano notes feeling almost mocking. After they left, Richard reached across the table, still damp from the wine, and gently held my hand. "It's okay, Laura. Family is complicated," he said softly, his voice comforting yet filled with understanding. I wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the warmth of normalcy, but the sting of humiliation lingered stubbornly, sharper than ever. Later that evening, I received a call from Michael's wife, Jennifer. Her voice dripped with false concern. "Laura, we're just worried about you. We barely know this Richard person." I hung up slowly, my hand trembling, the hurt of the day mingling with confusion and a painful awareness of the distance that had grown between me and the son I once trusted completely. And yet, even through the tears, a quiet spark lit somewhere deep inside me. A whisper that said maybe, just maybe, this humiliation wasn't the end of something, but the beginning of a reckoning I didn't yet understand. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt unusually silent, yet every creak and groan of the old floorboards seemed to amplify the echo of Michael's words in my mind. "What does he even do?" "Probably after your money from Dad's inheritance." Each syllable was like a small dagger, twisting deeper into a place I had thought was resilient, thought was unshakable. I pressed my face into my pillow, willing sleep to take me, but it was useless. Images of Richard's calm demeanour, his warm eyes, and Michael's sneering face danced across my mind in a cruel, relentless carousel. I thought of Tom. My beloved Tom, gone these 2 short, endless years, and yet ever present in my memory. He had a quiet strength, a moral compass that never wavered, and a heart that always chose kindness first. He would have never approved of Michael's cruelty, not toward strangers, not toward family, and certainly not toward someone I held close. I felt a pang of sorrow mixed with anger, my chest tightening as I imagined Tom sitting across from Michael, gently but firmly holding him accountable for his disrespect. How I wished for Tom's presence that evening, for his wisdom, for the reassurance that I had not failed in raising my son. By mid-morning, unable to endure the weight of my thoughts alone, I called Susan, my lifelong confidant, and asked to meet at our favourite cafe. It smelled of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries, a place that had been witness to decades of our laughter, tears, and countless heart-to-heart conversations. Seeing her face, the familiar curve of her smile and the gentle crinkle at the corners of her eyes brought me a fragile comfort. "Susan, I don't know what's happened to Michael," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around my cup, seeking warmth, grounding. "He's become so cold, so judgmental. I feel, I don't know, shattered, but not for me because I can endure things, but for Richard. For the man I care about." My eyes welled up, tears threatening to spill over, and I felt the heaviness of my grief combine with a fresh wave of betrayal. Susan reached across the table, her fingers warm against mine, anchoring me in the moment. "Honey," she said softly, "maybe it's time you learn more about Richard. Not because Michael is right, but for your own peace of mind. Sometimes when our hearts are open and hurt, knowledge can give us strength, not fear." Her words, gentle but insistent, echoed something I had been avoiding, curiosity mingled with apprehension, a need to truly understand the man who had brought light back into my life. That afternoon, alone at home with Richard, I did something I am not proud of, something that made my stomach twist with guilt even as I acted. Richard had gone into the shower, and I found myself hovering over the jacket he had carelessly left draped over a chair. My fingers trembled as I reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded card. The moment I saw it, my breath hitched. Richard Morrison, former CEO, Morrison and Associates. My hands shook as I clutched it. I felt the surge of fear and awe, a mixture that made my head spin. Could it really be? I placed the card on the table and immediately searched the name online, my heart racing, pulses hammering against my ribcage. Morrison and Associates, one of the largest and most influential consulting firms in all of Connecticut. My breath caught. Richard, he had built this empire. And sold it. For millions. For millions. The word seemed almost unreal as I stared at the screen, heart pounding, feeling both exhilaration and guilt for doubting him in the first place. The soft clearing of a throat made me jump, "Laura. Everything okay?" Richard's voice, warm and curious, startled me. My hand jerked, hastily closing the laptop. "Yes," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just checking emails." My voice sounded small even to my own ears, and I prayed he didn't sense the storm of emotion churning inside me. That evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon and bathed the room in soft amber light, Richard took my hands into his. The warmth of his palms, the gentle squeeze, grounded me. "Laura," he said quietly, his gaze steady and deep, "there's something I need to tell you about my past." His voice, gentle yet firm, carried a gravity that made my chest tighten with anticipation and apprehension. I wanted to know everything, yet a part of me feared what I might discover. Before he could continue, my phone buzzed insistently on the counter. I glanced at it, heart sinking when I saw the name Michael. Reluctantly, I answered, "Mom, I need money. The investment I told you about fell through. Just $50,000 to tide me over." His voice was casual, almost rehearsed, like he was asking for a favor from an acquaintance rather than his own mother. My pulse quickened not from excitement, but from the familiar ache of betrayal and exhaustion. This was the 4th time this year. Each request had been wrapped in stories, half-truths, and promises I desperately wanted to believe. And yet, my intuition, fragile but insistent, whispered that this was not the first time my generosity had been exploited. A shiver ran through me, a mix of sorrow and determination. I hung up, pressing my forehead to my palm, feeling the weight of both grief and resolve. I had been a mother my entire life, giving everything I had to nurture and protect, to love without reservation. And yet now, at 65, I was being forced to recognize that love could be manipulated, that trust could be weaponized. I looked across the room at Richard. His presence was steady, comforting, and yet I could see the quiet curiosity in his eyes, the unspoken question, "What will you do next, Laura?" I drew in a deep breath, feeling the swell of courage that had been slowly building within me since that Sunday afternoon. For the first time, I understood that protecting my heart also meant standing up for it, even when it hurt, even when it meant facing the person I had once trusted most in the world. That night, as darkness settled over the house, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not allow humiliation or betrayal to define the rest of my life. I would seek the truth, and I would protect my dignity. The road ahead was uncertain, and perhaps painful, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the spark of something undeniable: hope, clarity, and the stirring of a strength I had almost forgotten the first possessed. It was 2 a.m., and the kitchen was bathed in the soft, cold glow of the overhead light. Outside, the world slept, oblivious to the storm raging inside my small, familiar space. I sat at the worn wooden table, papers spread before me, my hands trembling as I scrolled through months of bank statements. Each line, each transaction, etched a painful pattern into my mind. My pension from teaching, my careful savings, and even the life insurance Tom had left me, all of it had been steadily siphoned away, bit by bit, under the guise of urgency and trust. Since Tom's death, I had given Michael over $200,000. Each time, he presented a new reason for business opportunities. He had said once, eyes gleaming with false hope. To help with the mortgage, he claimed another time, his voice almost pleading, almost convincing. I had wanted to believe him, because a mother always wants to see the goodness in her child. I wanted to be supportive, to trust, to help. But now, as I traced the numbers with a finger that shook more from betrayal than from fatigue, I realized that support had become exploitation. Images of their lavish lives haunted me: the condo in a shiny glass tower downtown, the cars that gleamed too brightly for their declared means, vacations to places I could only dream of. My own modest life, filled with memories of Tom and quiet routines, had been leveraged to fund the illusion of their comfort. I felt an ache that was physical, a heaviness that pressed into my chest and refused to leave. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the Laura who could find forgiveness in her heart, who had always believed in the potential for redemption. But tonight I could not. All I felt was exhaustion and an urgent need for clarity. I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number, my fingers stiff, my heart pounding. "Michael," I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "No more money. Not until you explain where it's all going." There was a pause, and then incredulity laced his tone. "Mom, are you serious? After everything I've done for you?" I felt a pang of disbelief, as if his words were meant to punish me for noticing the truth. "What exactly have you done for me, Michael?" I asked quietly, each word measured, carefully restrained. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he muttered, almost reluctantly, "I visit you, don't I? I check on you." That's worth something. The weight of that statement pressed on me. My own son saw me not as a mother, not as a human being with hopes and vulnerabilities, but as an obligation, a bank account, a source to draw from at will. My heart sank in a way I had never anticipated. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. This was not about resentment, it was about truth, about understanding what had really been happening while I had tried to trust the person I had loved most in the world. Later that evening, when the tension and sorrow had left me raw and fragile, Richard finally took a seat across from me. His eyes, always kind and steady, held a seriousness that made my heart flutter with anticipation and apprehension. He reached for my hands, squeezing them gently. "Laura," he began softly, "there's something I need to tell you about my past." His words felt like a lifeline, a bridge between the confusion and pain that had enveloped me and the clarity I desperately sought. I listened, holding my breath. "I built Morrison and Associates from nothing," he said, his voice quiet but firm, weighted with pride and humility all at once. "I devoted decades of my life to it. When I sold the company 2 years ago, I kept one condition: the new owner, David Chen, had to retain all employees and their benefits." I nodded slowly, marveling at his integrity. "That's very noble of you," I murmured, my voice barely audible, caught in a mixture of awe and disbelief. I could feel the admiration stirring in me, a quiet warmth in the midst of the storm I had been navigating. He paused, letting the significance sink in, then continued. "David's been a friend for years. Actually, your son Michael works in their marketing department." The words struck me like a bolt of ice through my veins. My blood ran cold. I could barely breathe. "What did you just say?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of a truth I had never anticipated. Richard met my eyes, his gaze calm, but revealing the tiniest flicker of sympathy for my shock. "Michael works for David. I met him once at a company event, but he didn't know who I was. I was introduced only as a consultant." His words carried both explanation and a subtle warning. The collision of worlds was closer than I had imagined. I sank into my chair, a swirl of emotions pressing against me: fear, disbelief, betrayal, and the faintest spark of opportunity. The image of Michael, arrogant and entitled in my living room only days before, flashed across my mind, juxtaposed with this new revelation. The realization dawned slowly, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Michael had been blind to Richard's past, blind to the truth, and now the scales of power, knowledge, and integrity were shifting. That night, I sat quietly in the dim light of my living room, thinking about everything: the exhaustion of giving, the sting of betrayal, the gnawing sorrow of being misunderstood by the one person I had loved unconditionally. Yet alongside the pain, a quiet determination began to grow. I could no longer be the passive observer in the story of my own life. I could no longer allow ignorance, deception, and arrogance to dictate the way my heart and my resources were treated. I made a decision, a seed of resolve planted deep in my chest. The next day, I would begin to act. I would not act out of vengeance, but out of clarity and self-respect. The pattern had emerged, the truth was before me, and it was time to reclaim what had been taken, not only in finances, but in dignity and emotional safety. Richard's hand rested over mine, warm and steady, and I drew courage from that simple gesture. I realized that the path ahead would not be easy. It would require patience, intelligence, and resilience. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the quiet thrill of hope that the heart could heal, that wrongs could be addressed, and that the love I had given freely could eventually be honored with truth. The morning air was crisp as I pulled into the parking lot of Michael's office building, a place I had only ever visited in passing or in his tales of corporate meetings and promotions. My hands rested on the steering wheel, trembling not from fear, but from anticipation and a strange, electric mixture of anger and resolve. I had rehearsed this in my mind countless times, each version ending differently, in confrontation, in tears, in quiet observation. Today, I decided it would end in clarity. I walked through the revolving doors, heart beating fast, and approached the receptionist's desk. She looked up at me, startled, confusion etched on her face. "Mrs. Patterson." "Michael didn't mention you were coming," she said. Her voice polite but edged with curiosity. "It's a surprise," I said, forcing a sweet smile. Though my pulse raced so fast I thought she might notice. Inside, I was a storm contained, each heartbeat echoing the determination that had been slowly building over weeks of betrayal and sleepless nights. I was led to the elevator, and as I rode up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also exhilaration. For the first time in months, I wasn't simply reacting. I was taking action. I was asserting control over a part of my life that had been quietly eroded by manipulation and deceit. When the doors opened, I stepped into the modest office space, my eyes scanning the room. And then I saw Michael leaning over his desk, tapping impatiently at a keyboard. His expression froze as his gaze landed on me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" The color drained from his face, replaced by a mixture of shock, disbelief, and irritation. "I wanted to see where my money's been going," I said quietly, letting each word land softly but firmly. My voice didn't tremble, though my chest felt tight with emotion. I walked closer, noting the difference between the reality of his office and the stories he had told me. There were no executive views, no grand decor, nothing befitting the luxurious life he had implied. Just a modest office, papers stacked in uneven piles, a few personal trinkets. On his desk, I noticed a photograph, Michael and Jennifer aboard a yacht, sun glinting off the water, the picture a snapshot of indulgence. I picked it up lightly, pretending to admire the scenery. "Nice boat. Yours?" I asked, letting the question linger in the air like a quiet accusation. Michael stammered, cheeks flushing. "It's a friend's," he said, eyes darting nervously to the side as if the walls themselves might witness his lies. A colleague knocked at the door. "Michael, Mr. Chen wants the Morrison report by 5, they said before retreating, leaving Michael's office momentarily empty. He muttered something under his breath and hurried out to get coffee. I waited, breathing steadily, feeling the weight of the moment. Then an impulse struck me, a mix of fear, curiosity, and necessity, and I acted. I opened his computer, already unlocked, my hands shaking with a cocktail of dread and determination. What I saw made my stomach twist, a mixture of betrayal and vindication flooding me at once. Emails to Jennifer scrolled across the screen, each one a testament to deception. Got another $30,000 from Mom. She's so gullible. Just need to keep the old lady happy a bit longer. My hands trembled as I took photos with my phone. Each click capturing evidence of manipulation and callousness, I scrolled further. Finding more, forged investment documents, plans to contest Tom's will. Discussions about placing me in a home once my money ran out. The full scope of their deceit hit me like a wave, leaving me momentarily breathless, trembling, and angry, but also clearer than I had been in months. The reality of Michael's intentions, his exploitation, and his willingness to betray his own mother crystallized before me. Then a voice, casual and unaware, called from the doorway, "Mom." Michael's presence startled me, making my heart leap into my throat. I quickly closed the laptop, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I was just admiring your workspace, sweetheart," I said softly, my smile tight but my voice steady. Later that evening, I met Richard in the quiet comfort of our home. My hands shook as I handed him the phone, the photos, the tangible evidence of betrayal. His eyes softened as he took in the depth of my pain and the courage it had taken to uncover the truth. "Laura, I'm so sorry," he murmured, pulling me close as I cried into his chest. His embrace was firm, reassuring, a reminder that not all love was conditional, that not all hearts carried deceit. I clung to him for a long moment, allowing the tears and fear to pass through me, leaving a faint, aching clarity in their wake. "I want justice, Richard," I whispered, my voice muffled against his shoulder, trembling but resolute. "But I need to be smart about this. I can't act out of anger. I need to be precise, careful. I need this to count." He nodded, his gaze steady, affirming without judgment, his hand brushing away a stray strand of hair from my face. "We will do this together, Laura. With patience, with strategy. You will reclaim what is yours, not only the money, but your peace, your dignity." As I walked into the night later, the city lights twinkling like distant promises, I felt a strange calm begin to settle in my chest. The discovery had been painful, yes, but it had also gifted me a sense of empowerment. For the first time in months, I saw a path forward, not through fear or deceit, but through truth, clarity, and the alliance I had forged with Richard. The storm was far from over. Michael's betrayal had cracked the foundations of my trust, but it had also illuminated a strength I had almost forgotten I possessed. I realized that standing firm, gathering evidence, and facing the reality of human weakness did not make me cold, or unfeeling. It made me resilient. It made me capable. It made me alive again. And in that realization, in the quiet moments after tears had dried and courage had settled into my bones, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Hope that the days ahead, though challenging, could be reclaimed. Hope that dignity and justice were possible. Hope that I could rise above betrayal, stronger than before, and that my story, my life, would no longer be defined by deceit, but by the strength, clarity, and love I chose to embrace. The 2 weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance between fear and empowerment, each day stretching endlessly with the weight of what needed to be done. And the quiet thrill of finally reclaiming some control over a life that had been subtly manipulated for far too long. Richard and I spent hours together, combing through documents, piecing together evidence, and slowly, painstakingly, constructing a narrative of truth that could stand up to scrutiny. Each receipt, each email, each small discrepancy added another layer to the picture I had once refused to see: the full scope of Michael's deception. Richard, calm and methodical, guided me through the process, offering explanations in quiet tones that never patronized, only reassured. One afternoon, he introduced me to his friend David Chen. David was an imposing figure in stature, but his eyes betrayed kindness, curiosity, and a spark of righteous indignation. The moment he learned what Michael had been doing, the shock on his face was palpable. "Laura," he said, voice low and urgent, "I had no idea. Your son has been underperforming for months, but this is beyond anything I imagined." He gestured toward stacks of reports and spreadsheets, documents that had been painstakingly gathered and meticulously organized. "These aren't mistakes or oversights. This is deliberate manipulation, using both company resources and personal trust to his advantage." I felt a shiver run through me, part horror, part vindication, as I watched the gravity of the situation settle in David's gaze. He began to show me the expense reports in detail, each line a testament to Michael's audacity, extravagant dinners, hotel stays, flights, even luxury shopping, all billed to the company under fabricated purposes. I traced each number with a finger, heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. The man I had raised, the boy I had held in my arms as a child, had become a figure I barely recognized. David leaned back, rubbing his temples briefly, then looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I have a foundation gala coming up in 3 weeks," he said, voice calmer now, though still imbued with purpose. "It's our biggest event of the year. All employees, board members, investors, everyone will be there." Richard squeezed my hand, a quiet gesture of solidarity. "What are you thinking, David?" he asked gently, as though acknowledging that the decision of how to proceed would rest not only on his friend but also on me. David's eyes met mine, unwavering, and in that moment I felt a sense of clarity I had not experienced in months. "I'm thinking it's time Michael learned some humility," he said firmly. "And Laura, you deserve to reclaim your dignity." The weight of his words sank into me like sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. I felt a strange thrill and acknowledgement that, at last, my pain and endurance could be transformed into something meaningful. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. It wasn't cruelty, it was reclamation. And I had never felt more alive. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I met with our lawyer, Margaret, who meticulously documented every piece of evidence we had collected. Every email, every falsified invoice, every manipulative request was catalogued, ensuring that when the time came, there would be no question of its authenticity. Each step I took made me feel lighter, more anchored in my own power, even as I navigated the lingering waves of doubt and emotional exhaustion. Michael, oblivious to my discoveries, called twice more during this period. Once claiming a business emergency, and another time citing Jennifer's supposed medical bills. Each time I answered with calm precision, my voice steady though my heart thumped with barely contained emotion. "Of course, honey. I'll wire it tomorrow," I lied, each word tasting bitter against my teeth. I could almost hear the greed in his voice, the presumption that my generosity was inexhaustible. But now each lie I spoke was a tool, a shield, a step toward the truth I intended to reveal. Susan, ever the compassionate friend, became my anchor in these days of preparation. Together, we went shopping for the gala, selecting fabrics and styles, debating colors, sharing quiet laughter and soft tears in the dressing room. "Laura," she said, gently tugging at the hem of a navy blue gown, "you're going to shine. Everyone will see the strength you carry, even if they don't yet understand the story behind it." Her words resonated deep within me. For so long, I had hidden my strength, muted my needs, and carried the weight of others' deceit silently. Now, there was an opportunity to step into the light with purpose, and the realization sent a shiver of empowerment through my entire being. I chose the navy blue gown, elegant and understated yet striking in its simplicity. I had my hair styled, soft waves brushing my shoulders, and I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw not a woman defined by loss or betrayal, but a woman poised, determined, and radiantly alive. The reflection staring back at me was someone who had endured, who had learned, and who was ready to reclaim her dignity in a world that had tried to exploit her. The night before the gala, my phone rang. Jennifer's voice, saccharine and practiced, filled the room. "Laura, Michael told me about the money. You're such a generous mother-in-law," she said, each word dripping with Falk's admiration. "Anything for my family," I replied evenly, each syllable carefully measured, tasting bitter as it passed my lips. I hung up and exhaled. a shiver running down my spine, realizing that the performance, the pretense, and the deception I had endured was about to meet its reckoning. I turned to Richard, who had been quietly observing, the quiet strength in his gaze anchoring me. "Tomorrow," I said softly, my voice steady now, infused with determination, "everything changes." He smiled, a mixture of pride and affection in his eyes. "Yes, Laura. Tomorrow, everything changes." That night, I lay awake in the quiet of our home, feeling the hum of anticipation coursing through me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of balance returning to my life, not in the form of comfort or safety, but in the form of agency, clarity, and courage. The road ahead would demand strength and precision, but for the first time, I truly believed in my own power to confront betrayal, reclaim what had been taken, and step forward into a future of my own making. And as sleep finally edged its way toward me, I realized that I was not merely preparing for a gala, I was preparing to reclaim my life. To stand tall in truth, to witness justice unfold, and to emerge not just unbroken, but unshakably resilient. The Grand Waterford Hotel shimmered like a jewel in the Connecticut night, its marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected 1,000 tiny lights. The lobby was alive with anticipation, the soft murmur of the elite, the delicate clinking of glasses, the gentle rustle of silk gowns and tuxedos. A live orchestra played in the corner, the music swelling and falling in waves that mirrored the anticipation in my chest. My heart beat so fast I thought it might leap from my ribcage, yet each breath I drew reminded me that I was here to stand tall, to reclaim the dignity that had been quietly eroded for far too long. Richard looked at me from across the car, dressed impeccably in his tuxedo, eyes calm and steady. "You look absolutely stunning, Laura," he said, and his words, simple as they were, filled me with a warmth that I had not felt in years. His presence anchored me, a reminder that I was not alone in this moment. I took a deep, trembling breath. "I'm terrified," I admitted, my voice barely audible, the faint quiver betraying the storm of emotion inside me. "Fear doesn't diminish your strength," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand over mine. "You're the strongest woman I know. And tonight, they're about to find out." We stepped out of the car, the valet bowing politely, and I followed him into the grand entrance. The red carpet underfoot seemed to stretch endlessly, reflecting the twinkle of chandeliers above. The energy inside the ballroom was electric, a gentle hum of anticipation, laughter, and the clink of crystal glasses. We moved through the crowd, taking in the elegance and opulence around us, feeling both dwarfed and yet buoyed by the magnitude of the night. We were fashionably late, making a deliberate entrance that drew glances and whispered murmurs. I caught sight of Michael and Jennifer near the bar, both dressed in expensive attire, their expressions smug, their postures comfortable. My chest tightened at the sight of him, the son I had nurtured, now perched on the edge of arrogance. I knew, deep down, that these trappings had come from me, from the funds I had given, believing in a son who would honor trust. Michael's eyes landed on me, and I saw the momentary flicker of recognition twist into shock, then crystallize into anger. "What are you doing here?" His voice carried disbelief, mingled with irritation, and perhaps, for a fleeting heartbeat, fear. "I was invited," I said, my tone calm, deliberate, a quiet assertion of my own right to be here, a presence he could no longer take for granted. I didn't rush to explain, because the truth was stronger than words, it would speak for itself. Jennifer's eyes narrowed, suspicion and curiosity warring in their depths. "By whom?" she asked sharply, leaning toward him, as though he held the answers that would maintain her own fragile sense of control. Before I could respond, a warm, familiar voice called across the room, "Laura. So glad you could make it. And Richard, good to see you." David Chen emerged from the crowd, his smile easy and genuine, eyes glinting with a spark of mischief tempered by kindness. Michael's confusion deepened. "Mr. Chen, you know my mother?" he asked, the edge of uncertainty creeping into his voice. David's smile widened, the kind that carried subtle amusement. "No, she's the guest of honor's special guest," he said, winking ever so slightly. The words landed softly yet decisively, a ripple of realization beginning to course through Michael's expression. "Guest of honor," Michael repeated, his face paling. The martini glass in his hand wobbled dangerously, as if the liquid itself sensed the shift in gravity around him. David gestured toward the stage, where a large screen flickered to life, elegant letters scrolling slowly across its surface, honoring Richard Morrison, founder, philanthropist, visionary. The crowd turned slightly to glance, their murmurs hushed as the significance of the announcement began to sink in. Jennifer's hand clamped tightly on Michael's arm, a protective, desperate gesture. "Morrison. As in Morrison and Associates," she whispered, eyes wide, voice edged with disbelief and fear. Richard, calm and composed, offered a polite smile, the kind of smile that carried quiet authority and unshakable self-possession. "Hello again, Michael," he said, his voice warm yet firm. "Now I'm someone, am I?" I watched Michael freeze, his posture stiffening, as if the very air around him had shifted. The years of deceit, manipulation, and presumption that he had cloaked himself in suddenly seemed to crumble under the weight of this revelation. He looked at Richard, then at me, confusion giving way to fear, a dawning awareness that the boy who had demanded money, belittled kindness, and seen his mother as a source of endless support, was finally confronted with a reality he could neither charm nor manipulate. I felt a strange mixture of emotions swell within me: vindication, sorrow, and a subtle, almost tender sense of release. This moment, long in preparation, was not about humiliating my son. It was about reclaiming my place in the world, asserting the dignity and respect that had been eroded. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months, even years, seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a quiet, steadfast resolve. Richard leaned close, whispering, "They're about to see the truth. You've prepared for this, Laura. You're ready." His words were steady, imbued with a warmth and confidence that made my heart swell. I nodded slightly, drawing in a deep breath, feeling the silk of my gown against my skin, the cool sparkle of the chandelier light dancing across the polished floor, and the weight of history and truth converging in a single, delicate moment. And as the orchestra's music swelled, filling the room with soft, expectant energy, I realized that this night would mark not just an event, but a turning point. For the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life, fully capable of claiming the respect, dignity, and justice that had been quietly denied me. The story I had endured, the betrayal, the manipulation, the quiet sacrifices was about to find its voice. I squeezed Richard's hand. A subtle gesture of solidarity and shared purpose. Together, we stepped further into the room, into the light, into the moment where truth would meet consequence, where courage would meet recognition, and where the years of quiet suffering would finally, irrevocably, begin to transform into clarity, strength, and renewal. The moment David Chen stepped onto the stage, the room seemed to exhale and then hold its breath all at once. The soft hum of conversation died, replaced by the subtle tension of curiosity and expectation. The chandeliers above caught the light in 1,000 prisms, scattering a faint glow over faces turned toward the stage. My palms were slick with sweat, and I felt Richard's fingers brush against mine, a quiet anchor amid the storm of nerves and anticipation that churned inside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," David's voice rang out, strong yet calm, commanding without arrogance. "Tonight we honor a man who transformed not just a company, but countless lives." His words resonated through the room, filling the air with a gravity that made my chest tighten. I glanced at Michael, standing near the bar with Jennifer, and for a fleeting moment, I saw his body freeze, the color draining from his face until he was pale as paper. His eyes widened, darting between the stage and me, though he seemed uncertain what he was seeing. Richard Morrison built Morrison and Associates on principles of integrity, compassion, and respect. David continued, his voice unwavering, each word deliberate. I felt a lump form in my throat as I watched my son, the same boy I had cradled in my arms, begin to understand slowly, painfully, shockingly what true accomplishment and true character meant. I saw the flicker of realization in his eyes, the first sign that the mask of entitlement and arrogance he had worn for years was cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. "Richard, please join me on stage," David announced, and the crowd erupted into applause, the sound washing over me in waves. I felt the warmth of Richard's hand squeeze mine one last time before he released it to step forward. His posture was steady, his gaze calm, yet the subtle lifting of his shoulders hinted at pride not self-aggrandizing, but a quiet acknowledgement of the journey he had undertaken and the life he had built. The applause gradually subsided, leaving a hush that felt sacred. Richard cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice strong, clear, and commanding. "But tonight isn't just about celebrating the past," he said, eyes sweeping the audience with quiet intensity. "It's about ensuring the values we cherish continue into the future." And then his gaze locked on Michael. My son's face turned rigid under the scrutiny, pale and fragile, the color of guilt creeping slowly into his cheeks. Richard's voice softened but carried an unyielding authority as he continued, "It's about recognizing that respect isn't earned by titles or positions, but by how we treat others, especially those we claim to love." Jennifer's hand tightened on Michael's arm, urgency and alarm written across her features. "We need to leave. Now," she hissed, leaning close, her breath warm against his ear. But Michael, frozen in the grip of shock and dawning awareness, could barely respond. David spoke again, his tone shifting subtly, a signal that the night's celebrations were about to intertwine with undeniable truth. "Before we continue, I need to address a serious matter," he said, eyes scanning the room as murmurs began to ripple through the audience. The subtle tension deepened, a weight settling over the crowd as they leaned in, drawn by curiosity and unease. "It's come to my attention that one of our employees has been engaged in fraudulent expense reports and misrepresentation of company resources," he announced, and in that instant, the room seemed to shrink, the chandeliers above casting long, sharp reflections of disbelief across polished floors. Michael's face shifted from pale to crimson, a slow bloom of panic overtaking him as the reality of exposure pressed down like a physical force. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked around desperately, seeking an escape, any escape, and found none. "Michael Patterson, please come to the stage," David said, his voice deliberate, unwavering, carrying the weight of authority and the certainty of truth. All eyes turned to my son. I felt the room's gaze on him, heavy and scrutinizing, but my own emotions were complex. Layered there was no joy here, only a profound sadness intermingled with determination. My chest tightened, memories of his childhood rushing through me, the way he had laughed in my arms, the warmth of his small hands holding mine, the trust and love I had given him freely. And now, confronted with his betrayal, I realized that love alone could not shield one from consequences. Michael stumbled forward, unsteady, the confident posture he had cultivated for years crumbling under the weight of his actions. Jennifer tugged at his sleeve desperately, whispering urgent, desperate words I couldn't hear but could feel pleas for retreat, for concealment, for an escape that did not exist. Security personnel began moving toward them, their presence quiet yet undeniable, and Michael's hesitation faltered into panic. I watched him, and despite the anger and hurt, I felt the odd pang of sorrow. This was my son, a man I had loved and protected, now standing exposed under the unforgiving light of truth. The room remained hushed, the orchestra's last notes fading into silence, the crowd holding its collective breath. I clenched my hands together, feeling the subtle tremor in my fingers, the echo of my own nerves mingling with the resolve that had brought me here. In that moment, I understood the profound weight of consequence, the undeniable clarity that came when deception met its reckoning, and the quiet dignity that could emerge when one chose truth over fear. Richard stood a step behind me, unwavering, his hand brushing lightly against my shoulder in silent support. I inhaled deeply, feeling the cool, tempered air fill my lungs, and I realized that the years of betrayal, of quiet manipulation, of sleepless nights and anxious calculations, were converging into a moment of profound clarity. The truth was no longer abstract or hidden, it was here, palpable, undeniable, and illuminated before everyone present. I felt a deep, silent resolve settle into me, like a flame steady against a storm. Michael had made choices, but so had I. I had chosen to endure, to observe, to prepare, to act with careful purpose. And tonight, as he faced the consequences of his actions, I was no longer simply a mother betrayed. I was a woman reclaiming her strength, her dignity, and her voice. As the first wave of whispers and gasps spread through the room, I understood that this night was about more than exposure, it was about transformation. Not just for Michael, but for me. Every trembling step I had taken, every tear shed, every moment of quiet doubt had led to this point. And in the tension, the fear, the heartbreak, and the inevitability of reckoning, I felt the subtle beginnings of freedom, strength, and renewal. Michael stood on the stage, small and rigid under the harsh glow of the spotlight, his usual confidence stripped away, leaving only the fragile, trembling figure of a man confronted by the undeniable weight of his actions. The soft rustle of fabric and the shuffle of feet filled the room with a tense, expectant hum. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my ears, a rhythm of anticipation and dread that mirrored the tight knot in my stomach. Every eye in the room was on him, yet I was drawn to the subtle shifts in his posture, the tremor of his fingers, the way his shoulders hunched as if the stage itself were pressing down on him. David Chen's calm, authoritative voice broke the silence, commanding attention with a precision that only he could muster. "These are expense reports filed over the past 6 months," he said, gesturing to the large screen behind him. Images flickered across the display, glossy photos of yachts glistening under sunlit seas, luxury hotel suites, sparkling jewelry, bottles of champagne. Extravagant dinners, items none of which could reasonably be considered business-related. Mr. Patterson claimed these were business expenses, David continued. His voice measured yet edged with disbelief. They were not. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire, their collective astonishment filling the room with a low, tangible vibration. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the cold, but from the gravity of the moment, the culmination of months of betrayal laid bare before everyone. People leaned forward in their seats, their eyes darting between the screen and the man who had once seemed so invincible, now diminished and exposed. Richard stepped forward, his presence calm yet commanding. The quiet confidence in his gaze steadied me, reminded me that I was not alone in this. "But there's something worse than stealing from your employer," he said, his voice resonating through the room with a weight that made the murmurs pause. The screen. changed, shifting to a more personal form of betrayal emails Michael had written to Jennifer. I felt my stomach drop as I recognized my own words, the private moments I had shared in trust, my love and concern for my son, now weaponized and mocked. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, a mixture of rage and heartbreak coursing through me. The screen scrolled through messages in which Michael discussed strategies to manipulate me, to keep me yielding to his demands, and to drain me of the money I had painstakingly saved. The betrayal was intimate, cruel, and deeply personal. Richard's voice carried on, unflinching. This man systematically defrauded his own mother, a retired schoolteacher, of over $200,000. The words hit the room like a clap of thunder. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom, a chorus of shock and disbelief. And I felt the air itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of the truth. My legs were trembling, threatening to buckle beneath me, but I stood, summoning every ounce of strength, every fragment of dignity I had preserved through years of quiet endurance. I looked at Richard, and he gave me a small, steady nod and unspoken reassurance that this was my moment to reclaim myself. "Laura," he said gently, "would you like to say something?" I inhaled deeply, drawing in the cool, measured air of the ballroom, feeling it fill my lungs and fortify my resolve. My vision blurred with tears, but my voice, when it came, was steady, resonant, and filled with a clarity that surprised even me. I stepped onto the stage, each movement deliberate, each step an assertion of my presence, my dignity, my truth. Every eye in the room found me, every whisper ceased, every gaze fixed on the woman who had endured, observed, and now, at long last, confronted betrayal with courage. Michael looked at me with an expression I had never seen, pure fear, mingled with disbelief and a dawning sense of accountability. His lips parted, and for a moment he seemed frozen, as though the gravity of his actions had rendered him incapable of speech. "I'm Laura Patterson," I began, my voice carrying through the silent room. I let the words hang, steady and deliberate, each syllable a testament to the life I had lived, the love I had given, and the endurance I had sustained. "I'm Michael's mother. I taught elementary school for 35 years. I believed in the goodness of people, in second chances, in family above all else." I turned toward him, my eyes locking on his, and I felt the weight of years, the ache of betrayal, and the quiet fortitude of survival converge in a single, crystalline moment. "I believed in you, Michael," I said softly, the words trembling with emotion but firm in meaning. Tears streamed down my cheeks, warm and insistent, but I did not falter. I let them fall, each drop a release, a cleansing, a quiet reclaiming of the strength that had been challenged and tested. "You told me you needed money for investments, for emergencies, for your future," I continued, my voice growing steadier with each word. "And I trusted you. I gave you what you asked, believing in the son I loved, in the bond that I thought could withstand anything." "Mom, I can explain," Michael began, his voice cracking, a mixture of fear, guilt, and desperation spilling into the room. "No," I said firmly, and the weight of my single word filled the room with its quiet power. Silence descended like a tangible force, the kind that presses against the skin and fills the chest. "You don't get to explain anymore. You get to listen." I could see the flicker of shame, the first real glimmer of remorse or perhaps just recognition in his eyes. I didn't speak again immediately. I let the silence linger, letting the truth sink in, letting the consequences of his actions weigh fully upon him. Around us, the crowd watched, riveted, drawn into the gravity of a mother's courage, the quiet strength of a woman whose love had been tested and manipulated, and whose dignity had been nearly stolen but was now, finally, reclaiming its rightful place. Every fibre of my being trembled, not with fear, but with the quiet, profound power of assertion. I had endured, observed, and prepared, and in this moment, standing before my son, the audience, and the full weight of truth, I realized the depth of the liberation that comes when betrayal is met not with vengeance, but with unwavering clarity, strength, and the reclamation of self. The ballroom had fallen into a silence so complete it was almost tangible. Even the soft hum of the orchestra from earlier seemed like a distant memory. Erased by the weight of anticipation and the gravity of the moment, every pair of eyes was fixed on the stage, but my focus was entirely on Michael. I saw him shrinking under the light, his usual bravado stripped away, leaving only the raw, fragile man who had made choices that betrayed trust, love, and the very bond we had shared for 35 years. I inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, and let it out slowly, steadying the tremor that had tried to creep into my voice. "When your father died," I began, my eyes never leaving Michael's, "he made me promise to take care of you, to support you, to love you unconditionally." My words carried across the room, and I could see the subtle shifts in people's expressions, the weight of empathy settling on their faces as they recognized the universal truth of parental love betra. Yet, and I continued, my voice firm, resonant, unwavering. I did everything I could, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every penny saved and given, every ounce of care I had in my heart. But you mistook my love for weakness. You took my kindness for stupidity. You assumed my trust was a license to exploit me. I reached for the folder at my side, the one I had meticulously prepared with the guidance of my lawyer. My hands were steady now, despite the storm of emotion within me. Opening it, I revealed documents, spreadsheets, and evidence that chronicled every fraudulent claim Michael had submitted, every forged signature, every deception that had been calculated to manipulate and drain me of my life savings. The crowd leaned in involuntarily, the air charged with collective disbelief and moral outrage. Jennifer, panicked, tried to rush toward me, but security officers intercepted her. Their presence firm and unwavering, she pulled against them, her voice frantic, pleading. But she could not reach me. The desperation on her face mirrored the fear that I could see now, etched into Michael's features. "You plan to have me declared incompetent," I said, letting my voice rise with controlled intensity, "to take control of my remaining assets. To place me in a facility where I would have no say in my life, no independence, no dignity. Every smile, every word of charm, every claim of love and loyalty, it was a lie, a calculated deception." Michael's knees buckled beneath him, and he stumbled, reaching for balance, his hands flailing for something stable, only to find nothing. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of reality. "I never meant. You called me gullible," I said, my voice a mixture of sorrow and righteous indignation. "You said I was a burden. You told Jennifer to keep the old lady happy just long enough to drain me dry. You reduced a life of love, care, and sacrifice to a convenient means of enrichment for your own comfort and greed." Gasps rippled through the crowd, a collective shudder of shock, disgust, and disbelief that filled every corner of the grand ballroom. Whispers intertwined with quiet exclamations, the reality of the betrayal settling over every witness like a heavy, undeniable weight. David Chen stepped forward, his face calm but resolute. "Michael Patterson," he said, his voice echoing with authority and moral clarity, "you are terminated effective immediately. We will be pursuing full legal action for all fraudulent expenses and violations." I felt the stir of validation, not for revenge, but for truth. And then, as my heart hardened into unwavering determination, I spoke with a voice that surprised even me with its steadiness and power. "And I said, each word deliberate and firm, am pressing charges for elder financial abuse and fraud. Michael collapsed to his knees completely, his hands braced against the polished wood floor, his body quivering, a man undone by the consequences he had so long ignored. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, please." He begged, the desperation in his voice raw and unfiltered, filling the room with the echoes of regret and fear. For a brief, fleeting moment, the old Laura, the woman who had always forgiven, always looked for redemption, always believed in the goodness of people, almost wavered. The mother in me wanted to cradle him, to soothe the hurt and fear, to cover the pain with the warmth of love and understanding. My eyes softened instinctively. But then I remembered the emails, the laughter at my expense, the careful plotting, the plans for my future when I would be powerless. I remembered the quiet despair of realizing my own son could manipulate and deceive me with such calculated intent. The storm of betrayal, fear, and sorrow that had built over months, years even, demanded acknowledgement, demanded a stand, demanded justice not for vindictiveness, but for survival, dignity, and truth. "I forgive you, Michael," I said softly, my voice almost a whisper yet carrying across the room. "But forgiveness does not mean there are no consequences. You will face them, and you will learn from them. That is the only way you can begin to understand what it means to truly love, to respect, and to act with integrity." Richard came to my side, his arm a steady, unwavering presence. He offered it to me, a gesture of solidarity, of support, of shared strength, and I took it without hesitation. We walked off the stage together, the lights momentarily blinding, yet the path before me clear. As we stepped down, something unexpected happened. The crowd, initially stunned into silence by the magnitude of the revelation, began to applaud, slowly at first, tentative, polite. Then building in volume and intensity, people rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. Some wiping tears from their eyes, the applause grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to shake the very walls of the ballroom. I felt the warmth of their recognition not just for the truth revealed, but for the courage it took to stand, to speak, and to reclaim dignity in the face of unimaginable betrayal. In that moment, I felt a profound, liberating release. The fear, the pain, the anxiety of months had culminated into a powerful affirmation of self-worth. I realized that I had not only survived, but I had risen, stronger and more resolute than ever. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen not as a mother deceived, not as a victim of manipulation, but as a woman who had faced the darkness of betrayal with courage, clarity, and unwavering grace, and I knew with a quiet certainty that from this moment forward, the story of Laura Patterson was hers to write, free, empowered, and unshakably whole. 3 months had passed since the gala, and the chill of early autumn crept through the streets as I walked into the courthouse, the weight of anticipation settling heavily on my shoulders. The building loomed over me, grand and imposing, yet inside, my resolve felt steadier than ever. Michael's sentencing was to be delivered today, the culmination of months of painstaking documentation, emotional turmoil, and quiet determination to reclaim not just my finances, but my dignity and peace of mind. I took a deep breath, smoothing my navy blue coat, the same color that had given me courage at the gala. I could feel the pulse of my heart in my throat as I stepped into the courtroom. Michael sat at the defense table, his head lowered, the shadow of shame clinging to him like a second skin. I saw the tight grip of Jennifer on his arm, though her face was unreadable, perhaps a mix of disbelief, regret, and the relief of finally disentangling herself from a life built on lies. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s, her presence commanding, her expression stern yet fair. She scanned the room, then fixed her gaze on Michael. "Mr. Patterson," she began, her voice steady and unwavering, carrying the weight of authority and moral clarity. "You betrayed the person who gave you life, who sacrificed for you and trusted you beyond measure." The words struck like a bell, resonating through the room, echoing against every polished wood panel and high ceiling. Michael's eyes flickered up, meeting the judge's gaze briefly before dropping to the floor again. I could see the slow dawning of comprehension, the stark realization that his actions had consequences beyond the private confines of our family home. The courtroom remained silent, every observer leaning into the gravity of the moment. "You have pleaded guilty to charges of elder abuse and financial fraud," the judge continued. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the emotional and financial impact on the victim, the court sentences you to 2 years in state prison. Additionally, you are ordered to repay every cent misappropriated, along with additional damages to compensate for the emotional distress caused by your actions." Michael's shoulders slumped, the weight of the verdict settling into him like a physical burden. Jennifer shifted in her seat beside him, her expression unreadable, but I could sense the quiet relief that this chapter of deceit was finally closing. She would file for divorce immediately, and it would be a clean break, a necessary one for all parties. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the proceedings, I rose, my legs steady, though my heart still carried the echo of tension and relief intertwined. Reporters crowded around me as I exited the courtroom, their cameras and microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Patterson," one of them asked, voice eager yet respectful, "how do you feel about your son's sentence?" I paused, the sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows catching the silver strands in my hair, and chose my words carefully. "I feel sad that it came to this," I said, my voice soft but clear, "but I also feel free. Free to live my life without fear, without betrayal, and with the dignity that comes from standing up for oneself." Richard was waiting by the car, a reassuring presence in the cool autumn light. His smile was calm, proud, and I felt a deep gratitude for his steadfast support through every stage of this ordeal. As we drove home, the city passing in quiet, reflective motion, I realized how far I had come from the vulnerable, anxious woman who had once hesitated to question her son. That evening, we sat on my porch, the sky painted in shades of amber and pink, the setting sun casting a warm glow across the neighborhood. I inhaled deeply, the air crisp with the promise of change. "You know," I said, turning to Richard, "I spent so long trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect widow, the perfect victim. I thought that was my duty. That was the measure of my worth." "You were never a victim, Laura," he said softly, squeezing my hand. "You were always a survivor. Every choice you made, every moment you hesitated but ultimately acted, you were building strength, even when you didn't realize it." My phone buzzed, interrupting the quiet reflection. It was a message from Susan. "Dinner tomorrow. I want to hear everything." I smiled, a genuine curve of relief and happiness touching my lips. The message reminded me of all the people who had quietly supported me, Susan, Richard, David, my lawyer Margaret, and even former colleagues of Michael's who had reached out to apologize and share their disbelief at his actions. "I've decided to start a foundation," I said, turning to Richard, my eyes shining with renewed purpose. "A foundation?" he asked, curious, his eyebrows raised. "For elder abuse prevention," I explained. "I want to use my story to help others recognize the signs, to understand that they are not alone, and to empower them to reclaim their dignity before it's too late." Richard smiled warmly, kissing my hand gently. "That's perfect. And I'd like to be the first donor." 6 months later, I stood before a room full of seniors at the Foundation's first official workshop. The room was quiet, attentive, every face reflecting a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. I took a breath and began. "My name is Laura, I'm 65 years old, and I was financially abused by my own son. The words, though heavy, felt liberating. Silence filled the room, but it was a receptive silence, pregnant with understanding and empathy. I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your dignity, and to start over. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly. But how do you forgive yourself for not seeing it sooner? I smiled gently, compassion threading through my words. By understanding that trust isn't a weakness. Love isn't foolishness. We believed in people we cared about. That's not our failure, it's theirs. And acknowledging that truth is the first step to reclaiming your power. After the workshop, Richard and I walked through the park, the golden light of late afternoon bathing the trees in warmth. Any regrets? He asked, his gaze steady, probing, yet tender. I thought of Michael, now in prison, hopefully learning remorse, of the money I would never recover, of the manipulation and betrayal I endured. But I also thought of the hundreds of people our foundation had already helped, the lives that might be spared the pain I had suffered, and the strength I had discovered within myself. No regrets, I said finally, my voice calm, filled with quiet triumph. Every painful step brought me here, to this moment, to this new life. Richard pulled me close, his arm around me, grounding and reassuring. So, what's next for the unstoppable Laura Patterson? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years, truly unburdened for the first time in decades. Whatever I want. And that's the most beautiful part. As we walked home together, hand in hand, the sun dipping behind the horizon, I realized something profound. At 65, I wasn't ending anything. I wasn't closing a chapter. I was beginning anew, and this time I was writing my own story, unbound by fear, full of hope, and radiant with the lessons of resilience, courage, and love. If you've been inspired by my journey, if you believe in standing up for yourself and reclaiming your dignity no matter the challenges, subscribe to this channel. Together, we can share stories of courage, survival, and new beginnings, and remind everyone that it's never too late to start over.